A very good morning. Thanks for clicking on to the Friday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. I want to take another look at all the various aspects with regards to building the winter forecast and a look at some of the drivers that need to be considered with regards to a certain type of weather pattern for the upcoming winter season. So I produced an article yesterday. Here it is. Linkage between solar minimum and cool Pacific, warm Atlantic, and the possibility that we'll have the best chance for a real winter since 2010. Now, I want to kind of go into that a little bit more, from that article that I produced yesterday, because one thing I want to lay out there right away, folks, is the fact that I'm not turning around and saying for a second we're guaranteed to get a 2009-10 or a November December of 2010 type cold. There's no guarantees, and it does feel as we go forward here that it is becoming harder and harder to get a winter. But when you look purely in a very simplistic way, because I'm not great scientifically minded. I don't know, the intricate details about the solar and atmosphere and planetary involvement and interaction between one another. It's way over my head. So some of you out there, a lot more clever than I am, would probably say, well, Mark, it's a lot more complicated than that, and I get that. I'm not trying to make out that I'm anything, anything particularly, knowledgeable, or I'm not trying to make out as if I'm cleverer than I actually am. But what is interesting is the fact that if you look back over the last 11 years, the sea surface temperature profile has altered what would appear along with the solar cycle. And by that I mean we've seen in recent years a warm Pacific and a colder Atlantic. And when you warm that North Pacific, you tend to boost the ridge over the North Pacific and into Alaska. That has, not always, but that has quite often produced a stratospheric warming that has favoured Arctic air coming down into North America and producing some very intense Arctic waves into the eastern half of the United States. What that's done is, however, it's boosted the thermal gradient or the temperature gradient over eastern North America. That in turn has boosted the strength of the jet stream over the North Atlantic. So quite often in recent years, in my opinion, from what I can observe myself, is that the Arctic oscillation has at times been quite negative, but the North Atlantic oscillation has not been negative, or at least when we have had a negative NAO, we've still had westerlies, we've still had quite a lot of Atlantic influence. And when you skip through the years, and I'll show you this in just a second, you see quite often what promotes a colder winter in the UK, certainly in recent years, in recent decades, seems to be when you've got a colder North Pacific and a warmer Atlantic. That changes the feedback process between ocean and atmosphere. And it's very interesting to see that 2009-10 and 2010-11 had a cold pull over the North Pacific here. What separates 09-10 from 10-11 is that we have a La Nina at the moment here. So looking back, 2010, I think, best represents the current year. And it also represents quite nicely with the current solar situation as well. It's about the same time frame coming off the minimum of 2018 and to what we have now. And you can see that here. So there's 2020. We're starting to climb into cycle 25. We've done the exact same thing roughly in 2010, and that is very interesting when you look at the sea surface temperature profile of 2010. So this is back to this time in 2010. Granted, the Pacific is colder then than it is now, but we've got and arguably the Atlantic is warmer as well. There's a lot of differences this year. There's a lot of standout weird aspects to this year compared to back then. But if you look at this chart, cold North Pacific, relatively or largely warm Atlantic. We've got the La Nina that's going at the moment, and we have back in 2010. We've got the warmth surrounding in Indonesia here. And if you look at the current year, you would argue that it has a best reflection of that. We've got a strong warmth over the kind of central North Pacific, but we've got the cold in the very similar area to what we had back in 2010. We've got the La Nina. We've got the warm Atlantic. Like I say, it's warmer now than it was back in 2010 because we don't have that little stripe of colder waters here. It'd be nice to see the central North Atlantic cooling somewhat. We've got the warmth surrounding Indonesia here, so it's interesting to see that. So, like I say, let's not blow that tightly out of proportion by saying that we're going to get another extreme winter, because how many times have I, along with other people, called a really cold winter and it's not happened? So there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that this theory or this idea, and it's not just purely my own, by the way. I'm not making out that all of a sudden I've come up with a new theory that nobody else has come up with. But this does not say or guarantee anything. And the weather and even climate has a tendency to kind of do its own thing, as we know that. Before we look at the each year, mid to late October, from 2019 right through to 2010, I want to look at the current snow cover across the northern hemisphere. It's starting to grow, the snow cover across Siberia. We're even seeing some across the top of North America. Some years it's been ahead of this, some years it's been behind this. But you can see here, much of Siberia, at least the Siberian part of Russia, is almost covered now by snow. The theory between Siberian snow cover in October and enhanced blocking during the winter season, I'm a little bit unsure about that one. The connection between that, I'm not entirely convinced that it kind of matters, if you will. But this is 2019, warm North Pacific. We've got a colder central North Atlantic, if you notice here. 2018, again, warm North Pacific. So, it has had a tendency, like I say, more ridging over Alaska, increased thermal gradient over eastern North America, and we're keeping the westerlies going. The QBO, by the way, is very interesting. I think, I could be wrong here, but I think the QBO has been the tendency has been for a westerly QBO, and that has been enhanced by the sun, but also by the sea surface temperatures, the feedback, ocean to atmosphere. Warm North Pacific, I think it's had a tendency to keep the QBO westerly. Westerly QBO, of course, belt of winds, 10 HPA over the tropics. When it blows west to east, it has a tendency to keep the jet stream, the polar jet stream further north, stronger. Easterly QBO, which has been harder to come by in recent years, again, I think that's been because of the sea surface temperature profile, or a part of the reason. If it's blowing east to west, that tends to have some frictional effects on the jet further north. It also has a tendency to help weaken the polar vortex here. And of course, I've spoken about it quite a lot recently, about the fact that the polar vortex is expected to be weaker this year. So a lot of different aspects is going to be very interesting. Big, like I say, big test coming up. Next year could actually be a bigger test if we get a La Nina developing, which I think we're due one. Could there be a possibility of all the parameters coming together, such as a 2009-10 winter? Of course, 2010-11 was cold, very cold, extremely cold to start with, November, December, and then it just turned around, of course. January and February were nothing particularly cold. Could we have that similar idea this year, and maybe a 2009-10 type winter next year if we have a La Nina development? These are all kind of ideas that are floating about my head. 2017, you can see here there was a little bit of cooling over the North Pacific, a little bit of a ribbon of cool coming out of the Baffin Straits into the central North Atlantic, but again, very warm North Atlantic with somewhat of a La Nina going as well, of course, in 2017. 2016, funny year. The QBO was expected to go easterly, and it actually reversed to a westerly. Again, very complex situation, but it was a strange one, very unusual. But you notice here, this time in 2016, warm North Pacific once again, colder North Atlantic. Notice the North Atlantic was actually colder in that time. 2015, big year, super La Nina. And of course, I think after the couple of years after that, we had, of course, very, very warm winters. Indeed, we did have the beast from the east in 2018 with a cold February as well. Bit of a kind of outlier in a sense that year with the 2018. The back end of that winter was very impressive indeed. Then as we start to go, so we have a series of warm North Pacific and can you argue really that the North Atlantic's probably warm as well? Yeah, you could probably say that. Notice here, 2014, we had the cold blob, if you will, over the North Atlantic, which was quite interesting to see. But this is the time frame, 2014, approaching the maximums, should I say. But what's interesting is the fact that this was when we started to see the cold North Pacific again. So what I believe is taking place is after the minimum, tend to have a warm North Pacific and a colder North Atlantic. Then as we go towards the maximum, we'll have a warm North Pacific and a colder Atlantic. Does that make sense? I don't know whether it doesn't. In my head it does. 2013, colder North Pacific, if you notice here. 2012, colder North Pacific. And of course, 2011 and 2010 will have something similar now. So this is going back to post solar minimum. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what happens this year. I think there is a lot of things that at least point to the possibility of something significant, I think, during the first half of the winter season. So, do you know what? Let's watch this space. Exciting times to come, I think. I hope you can stay here on my YouTube channel. Sign up. It's free. Subscribe, and we can follow this step by step as we go towards the cold season. And let's just watch and see what happens in the winter of 21-22. Hope you have a great weekend coming up, and I'll be back in the next couple of days with more. Bye for now.